Hotep, this is Michael Grays. We're having another community cop. Just sorry to announce that I'll be doing the show alone today. Noel Leader will not be doing the show today. He's on community cop assignment, as well as Julian Harper. Both are on community cop assignment. So I'll be going solo today. Just want to just commend everybody for various times. You know, there's been so many festive things going on that when I see people in the street, you know, they give us a lot of attaboys, you know, a lot of, you know, what's ups, and just want to thank everybody for the kind words that we always experience when I see you. Just thank you so much for that. Want to hit the ground running from the outset. As we always do, we do something this week in our history, and certainly our history is replete with historic event after historic event. But I'll just bring up two, you know, given the time frames that we're in. This week in our history, Soweto Uprising, 6/16/1976. Now, as you well know, they were knee deep in the struggle for freedom, justice, and equality in South Africa. South Africa at that time was under white minority rule, and I'm not saying that there's a significant difference now, but you know, because they got the diamonds and so many other minerals they still control to this day. But in any event, the students, the Soweto Uprising, the students protested 6/16. They were protesting the introduction and imposition of the Afrikaan language and course of study. Consequently, the African in them rejected these white supremacists and their ideology. Consequently, they met and gathered, and the crowd reached in excess of well over 20,000, north of 20,000 students, all young people at that time. And the police, in a cold and callous fashion, began shooting. Now, they initially said that the fatalities were in excess of 175 to less than 200. Actually, people said that, who were more accurate, said that the death toll would start at least 700 or more. They were shooting fully automatic weapons into a crowd of well over 20,000 people. Consequently, you can imagine that it was not even nowhere near less than 200. Hundreds of died and perhaps maybe thousands, but we would be remiss if we forgot that struggle. And certainly that day is now celebrated in South Africa. I think it's called Youth Day. Youth Day. Yeah, that's what it's called. And that's to keep the memory of those courageous youth who said enough is enough. And they put their feet down, 10 toes down on that one, and said, no, not that, no more of that. And that led, obviously, that was a major part of the struggle. And later on, they were able to maintain a certain level of independence after that, you know, during the time of Mandela. And won't argue as to what did that truly translate into. That's another message for another day. But also this week in our history, 6/17/2015 was the Charleston, South Carolina massacre, Mother Emanuel Church, where 9 people were callously killed by Dylan Ruth. who came into the church during a Bible study and prayer period and sat with them maybe in excess of an hour, pulled out his automatic weapon and began to fire in a cold-blooded fashion, killed them. He had a manifesto, as many of these guys do. You know, it was characterized by the FBI as a lone wolf. He was anything but a lone wolf. He was connected with other white supremacists. You could see by the patches, the Nazi swastikas and all the other paraphernalia that he wore at one time or another. And certainly he was treated in a very humane fashion when caught by the police later on. But in any event, he killed church people. If you were going to make your bones, so to speak, you could have picked a better location, because you claim that Black men are raping white women, irrespective of whether they're married to them or not. They're being taken advantage of. You're claiming that you did this for the white race. Well, if that's the case, why didn't you go in the hood on the corner and meet some young bloods and deal with them? No, that's not what you chose to do. You chose to go in a church that had no weapons, and you gave no quarter to praying church people, people who believed in the God of heaven, people that were praying to that God, and you chose to just kill them outright and left one that was laying down hiding. You left that one person to deliver the message as to show a level of intent. So, but in any event, you was caught later and treated very humanely and fed by the police en route to custody. So in any event, those are the two incidents this week that I brought up: the Soweto uprising, as well as what happened at Mother Emanuel Baptist Church. And that's an historic church, by the way. Let's never forget that out of that church, it has a long history of struggle going back to the time of slavery and insurrection. So let's keep that in mind. Now, of course, we have to look at there several things going on right now, and we're gonna jump right in. But from the outset, what's going on all over America, it seems that this whole mindset of replacement theory seems to be afoot. Now, this replacement theory is a clarion call to that white men primarily, and white women, are involved in, to saying that their history is being replaced. They are in fact being replaced, and that people other than themselves are replacing them. Consequently, they feel that Black people who suffer the most from their violence, that just does not stop. It is continued going back to the Civil War and on and on. We can go back further if you really want to. We can go back to ancient Kemet, but in any event, just to keep it here nationally, this war has gone on for centuries here. And this thinking is that somehow, if we were to achieve a level of power, that the very things that they did to us, we would visit upon them. Well, we just ain't made that way. We're just not made that way to do those sorts of things that was done to us. For the most part, the average Black person just want the ability to take care of themselves, their family, go to whatever religious worship they do, and just they're not thinking in terms of overthrowing whatever you're about for the most part. So when you say you are being replaced, well, you run the government. Every level of the federal government and the majority of all state governments and city governments are run by white people. The military, white. Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, primarily all white. The leadership. Now I know you have a Secretary of Defense that's a black man. I don't think he's been officially put in that position, but he's acting. He has the acting position as we speak. I don't recall the Senate voting him in as that yet, but in any event, he might be. So, but the intelligentsia, the intelligence agencies, first of all, CIA, FBI, all in white hands. The board chairs that control Wall Street, the Fortune 500, corporations, all controlled by whites. So how are you being replaced? You still control Harvard, Yale, all the other major colleges. That's under your control. Stanford on the West Coast, all that is under your control. You control industry, all the major factories that are left in this country, you control them. You control the factories and the means of production outside of this country. So what is this replacement? What is this fear of being replaced? You're still the majority in America. Numerically, a few decades from now, you might be the largest majority, but your numbers compared to, as they like to call it, people of color, will be able to collectively outnumber you decades from now. Not at this moment, though. But you feel you're being replaced. Consequently, you have your race soldiers out there, like Dylan Roof and others, that are doing these things. So right now, as we speak, with replacement theory aside, but still a part in the same context, you have prominent white people on the Democratic side and the Republican side debating over something we all saw. January 6th. What am I talking about? You have those that are saying it was a little dust up. It was a little more than tourists, you know, just taking a trip to the Capitol building. You have those that are saying it was anything other than just a tourist trip. It was true fear. It was a real insurrection. There was sedition. It was an insurrection of the highest order. It was actually an attempted coup of the Constitution and the American government. Now, any two people can argue over watching the same thing if you're intent on sticking by your guns. So in a basketball game, you can argue if a guy stepped over the line or not, or whether he was inbounds or out of bounds. You can argue that because it's a basketball game and there's no harm done whether you feel he stepped out or not. So one can argue that that's safe. But can you really say that 5 people did not die as a result of January 6th? Can you say that police officers were not savagely attacked? One police officer was killed that day, died later that night. It was reported early the next morning that he was killed. Now, somehow, over this past year and a half, most people have forgotten about that. Now, the Republican Party, who's saying that this was nothing more, at best, a dust-up, They were the ones that put in all these Blue Lives Matter laws all over. They put them in. But when a police officer is killed, somehow you just choose not to report it and try to forget it. Act like it never happened. Now, you had police officers crying for their lives. One vertebrae, his back was being torn asunder in a door, caught in the door. Between one side, you had police officers, and the other side of the door, you had the insurrectionists. And he was screaming like a little girl, screaming. Now you had police officers who were snatched out of that building trying to defend the entrances. And one was beaten by a New York City retired police officer, was beating a current Capitol police officer. You had another police officer that was dragged into the crowd, and he started begging for his life. They took his gun. Several police officers were sprayed with bear spray, so their vision was taken away from them. They could not see and function. You had in that situation a police officer begging for his life. He was actually begging for his life. The audio picked up him saying, "I got kids, don't kill me, don't kill me." And the guy who took his gun had the gun trained on him, and he said, "Don't kill me, don't kill me. I got kids at home." So you had that situation going on, and yet some maintain that there was no fear factor involved. They felt perfectly comfortable. And some of those very same ones who felt a comfort zone in that environment admitted that had it been Black people doing the same thing, they would have felt uncomfortable, and they would have wanted the Capitol Police to just start firing on everybody. But since these were friends of the President Trump at that time, certainly there was a lot of restraint being exercised by the Capitol Police because that understanding was already there, that these were acolytes of the president and they were doing his bidding. So you have that situation, and these lawyers, businessmen, elected officials are actually debating what we all saw. It's recordings. When you see recordings of clubs, of bear spray, of people dressed in tactical gear, fighting police officers, that's not a dust-up. That is not just some tourists going a ride. You forced yourself in the building illegally. And every office you went into illegally. And carrying all sorts of flags and wearing Nazi attire and Viking stuff and all that stuff that people were wearing. And you really thought that you would get over even those that were taken to court behind all this with the video footage said that they were doing the president's bidding. So you have that debate and that tension going on as we speak. Now, the situation in Buffalo, and I'll just speak about that briefly. As you know, they like to call them lone wolves. You had a lone wolf drive for hours to go to Buffalo. He did his research and found out this was a heavily populated Black community, and that the supermarket that was being used was primarily used by Blacks. Consequently, that's where he chose to go with his fully automatic AR-15 and take on innocent people. Yes, there was a retired security guard who was a retired police officer who made an attempt, tried to save some lives, woefully unprepared for a person with that type of firepower. He was killed in that process, valiantly trying to stop the threat of this white supremacist. 10 people were killed. These are all people that have manifestos. They're connected with other agencies. Now, with all the research that the FBI, which is probably one of the finest in terms of intelligence gathering, they can gather intelligence probably second to none, probably better than that of the CIA, I believe. Consequently, they were able to, whether you go way back to 2008, 2010 or 11, and then a couple of years later, they did the research again. And every time they came up, they said the greatest threat to domestic tranquility in America is white supremacists. These white groups, you know, whether it's all oath takers and all these Proud Boys, all these various groups, they're military, paramilitary, they come out of everything, special forces, Marines, Air Force, paramilitary, former police officers, correction officers, what have you. These guys are intent to preserve what they perceive to have been lost. White supremacy, as I said from the outset, controls every level of human endeavor, including entertainment. You know, I went through, you know, Navy, Air Force, Marines, all that, intelligence, business. They control all that, but they also control other areas. And so, you know, you wonder, what are they angry at? What are they so angry at? I know they use critical race theory as one of their mainstays, but critical race theory, why are they not calling them liars? If you tell them the truth, they just have government apparatuses, especially on a statewide level, governors that are disallowing you the ability to teach that history, even though it's true. If it happened to Black people, if they reduced the language from slavery to servitude and what have you, and they water everything down so they won't feel like they were the bad guys in this. And it's not that we're clinging to victimization, but we want the truth. We don't want revisionist history. Just tell the truth of how it happened. And so you have what happened in Buffalo. You have the situation in Uvalde, Texas, where so many people were cut down, at least what, about 19 children, 2 adults, something around those numbers. And the ease it takes. I mean, you turn 18 and a day or two later, you're able to buy AR-15. I mean, white people are out of their minds. They make it harder to get a driver's license. It's harder, it's probably harder to get a library card than it is to buy a gun in Texas. And certainly, you know, in New York and other places where there are a lot of Black people, you know, they're not having that. You're not just gonna walk into a store and able to get a gun. You know, they got rules and laws in place to prevent that. That's the situation we find ourselves in now. So want to give our community some information. There's a new study that shows there's an increased risk of breast cancer for Black women exposed to parabens. And these parabens are found in things like lotions, sunscreen, antiperspirants, makeup, and hair products. And parabens are like a group of compounds to help preserve and stabilize to prevent mold and mildew from these products to preserve its shelf life. So irrespective of whenever you pick up these products, you can't tell how old they are, but in any event, that's because of the parabens that are in it. Now, the majority of all parabens are in products that Black women use. Oh, yes, they know what products you use on your hair, on your body, your lotions, and the hair care products you use are differentiated from the hair care products that white people use. They know what you're using. They know your shopping habits better than you. So consequently, you have to watch that. Now, if you see methylparabens and hydroxybenzoate and things like that on the label, then there's a risk involved if you were to buy them because they have adverse effects. Now, science has shown from the science has shown that white breast cells, given the same dosage that are in those products, do not affect white women's breasts as opposed to that same dosage in Black women's breasts. So you gotta prevent yourself from using these parabens because they scientifically know who's it's gonna affect. A lot of science goes into I'll just say cultural based medicines and various things where they can know basically from either it's your melanin, what cleans to your melanin, what can disrupt like crack and different things, the effects that it has on you as opposed to the effects it might have on a white person. They know these things. They have biochemicals that they know can ill affect you and won't affect the white person standing right next to you. So whether it's chemtrails or whatever in New York City, they know which chemicals will ill affect you as opposed to a white person. So Black women, 41% higher death rate from breast cancer. Black women under 50 are twice as likely to succumb to breast cancer than white women. They know these things. So they're putting things in your body unbeknownst to you that will in the long run hurt you. They know about these things, they don't care, they're profiting by it. So a word to the wise is sufficient. Look for products that are paraben free in your deodorants, in your lotions, what have you. Look for those things because in the long run, it can cost you your life. And as I said, these same biolabs that are in Ukraine, I said before that they were over 30. The more accurate number is something like they were at least 46, according to many people. So they are studying that, and that's just in Ukraine. They said worldwide, America has over 300 plus labs where they're doing making bioweapons and potentially biochemicals that can kill and disrupt and can culturally hurt you specifically. So let's be aware of that in our endeavors. Let's be aware of that. Now, President Joseph Biden did sign legislation around Juneteenth. It's now considered a federal holiday. Many people all over the world will be celebrating Juneteenth. And so I'll just say that we're going to celebrate, and I do too. I celebrate maybe just a little bit differently than some. Some are just going to take it as a festive holiday that 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 came up from General Granger. He arrived in Galveston, Texas on June 19th. Now that's well after the Civil War, which ended in April. But it takes a while to gather the troops and to journey into Texas by horseback. So when he arrived there, and the word was that he made the pronouncement that all former African slaves are free. And that's what they would have you believe, that somehow they didn't know. They were not aware, the white people were not aware, the black people were not aware, and that somehow, magically, when he came there and made that pronouncement, everybody was able to get rid of their chains, walk right out of the plantation, and go on about their business. Now, I want you to picture that, if you can. That's not what happened. But Biden is not going to say that. Biden mentioned when he signed it, he talked about the Emancipation Proclamation, which was 1862, and he didn't mention anything else. And then he said, basically, Juneteenth. Now, you should know, you should be educated enough or informed enough to know that the process wasn't that simple. Lincoln did not free Black people in 1862. Now you say, well, because there were two countries. There was the Confederate States of America and there was the federal government of America. Well, was all the Black people free in the North that he controlled? No, they were still enslaved. He told the South that if they dropped their guns, they could keep their slaves. Did you know that? He said he will free every Black person in America to keep the Union together. He will enslave every Black person in America to keep the Union together. His priority was to keep the Union together. This is President Lincoln, you know, in most people's opinion, the greatest president that ever lived. And they might be right about that, you know, in terms of his significance and importance. He probably was the greatest ever. But this is what he said. Now, the people in the North were not free, the Africans. They were not free. They were not free at that time. So if you was in Maryland, New York, Philadelphia, and all that, you were not automatically free. If you were in Massachusetts and all those other places, you weren't free. That came later, 3 years later, in 1865. So what do we have here? Juneteenth magically happens and somehow people are free. Well, and at the Appomattox, Black people were free, but that was the culmination of Black soldiers, over 200,000 strong, saving America, making America one country. Consequently, they could not go back to business as usual because you had 200,000 Black men who was about it. So consequently, the chains were broken, at least the physical chains. But there was one place that said they're going to continue slavery. It doesn't matter what the federal government said. Oh yes, the Lone Star State, Texas, said they were not going to release their slaves. And so Confederate generals that were not at Appomattox, colonels, captains, lieutenants, sergeants, corporals, soldiers who were not at Appomattox, all, and that was the courthouse that settled where Grant and Robert E. Lee called the truce, and which ended, for the most part, the Civil War. So what happened? These Confederates all went to Texas with the understanding that this was the last bastion of white supremacy where they could enslave Black people. Well, over 20,000 Black men, 20,000. That's 10% of the 200,000. Over 20,000 Black men volunteered to go to Texas with General Granger. Yes, he was the superior officer, but the majority of those men were all Black. Well, Texas told them, come on, anybody that goes into Texas will not come out alive. This is historical facts. Well, what happened? Well, those 20,000 men, the 9th, the 10th, 24th, the 25th, 31st, all of them and others went to Texas, bearing down, saying, show and prove. You said anybody that goes there won't come back alive? Well, these men were tried and tested. They've been in all the major battles, and they wasn't playing. They were tried and tested. When they saw from a distance 20,000 Black men bearing down on them, their spies seen it, reported it to them. Some of them ran north. Now they in Texas. They ran north into Colorado. Others went west into New Mexico. Others, so scared, they went further west and they ended up in Arizona. They said Black men are coming from everywhere. They're bearing down on us, and they coming at lightning speed. They coming from the stars, the moon. They coming from the moon. They coming from Pluto. They coming from Saturn. They coming from the sun. They hot, and they not playing. They scattered and all ran. Now, McCain's family is from Mississippi. How did some of them end up in Arizona, which is the state he represented as a U.S. Senator? In any event, they scattered. These Southerners ran in every direction that wasn't the direction where them Black soldiers were coming from. So they ran like the cowards that they truly are. They claimed that they was going to hold it down and keep people in servitude. Well, that didn't happen. They ran. Consequently, those Black men were able to free the last bastion there in Texas. And that's what those Black people there remembered. They didn't just start celebrating Juneteenth. They've been doing that over 150 years. That's the memory of that part of Texas. That's the memory. See, many of us started celebrating in the 1980s when that legislation got signed in Texas first, and then it followed suit after that. No, these people understood and knew that these were Black soldiers that freed them. Some of us don't even understand that it was Black soldiers that freed us. It wasn't Lincoln. You know, you have Black leaders, Black professors, Black elected officials saying that Lincoln was the great liberator. Who did he liberate? I'll give him credit for one thing. He was able, with an act of Congress, to constitutionally allow Black men to fight in the war, not just be grunts and carry supplies, to actually fight. He did that, but he did that to save America. He made it so that with an act of Congress, Black men could fight for their freedom. And in so doing, free every black man, woman, and child in America. That's how it happened. To save the Union, Lincoln allowed black men to fight, and black men couldn't wait to beat the hell out of those Confederates. Beat them down, every battle, beat them down. Yes, a lot of them died in that process, but they gave their lives willingly for all of us. That's what they did. So don't give Lincoln credit for what he did not deserve. I'm not saying that he didn't do anything, but like I said, he said he'll free every black man or he'll enslave every black person. So after that, we got the rights. We got rights of where we can enter into real marriages, into contracts, where we could actually own property and negotiate on behalf of ourselves, open businesses, what have you. That all happened after the Civil War. Before that, anything you owned, it was temporal at best, because any white person could take anything you had. A white person's word can have you locked up just by saying you owe them. And that's all it took. And to some places, still to this day, any black man that's messing with white women, the moment that woman says, that seriously, you are in a world of trouble, irrespective of what you think the relationship is. The moment you do that, you in a world of trouble. So just keep that in mind when you think of Juneteenth. You're talking about a celebration of yourselves. We're not talking about celebrating whether it was General Granger. We're not celebrating Lincoln, Emancipation Proclamation. We're not celebrating any pronouncement. This was as physical could be, that Civil War, and physically what would have happened if those white soldiers did not run and vacate Texas. What would have happened? They had all these soldiers, and they reaffirmed to those white people, keep your slaves intact. Don't worry about it. We're going to protect you. Well, the black man said, show and prove. That's what the black man said. Show and prove. That's the game. Okay. We're going to meet you on the 50-yard line in the football field. That's 100 yards. We're going to meet you at the 50-yard line and see what you got. Well, before we could see what they had, they ran. You know, their scouts told them, black men are coming from everywhere. Well, they ran. They had the opportunity, and they didn't take it because they knew that 10th Cavalry and Buffalo Soldiers, that, you hear all these songs about Buffalo Soldiers. Yeah, well, they were real. And the 9th Cavalry probably was even better. They had a stronger record. So it was black men fighting for black people that freed us. And so on the 19th, I'm celebrating black manhood. I'm not playing with it. I'm not celebrating some nice, mammy-pammy, wishy-washy, some dainty thing that a white general made a pronouncement. He held up his hands and made a pronouncement, and somehow black people magically were free in Texas. Know a little something about Texas. Mothers from Texas, fathers from South Carolina. And so that history is profound with the struggles that black men and women had to go through in these places. So don't on that day celebrate white people. It wasn't white benevolence that got us that day. No, far from it. And it doesn't matter what Biden says that day. Okay, he gave us the holiday. We gave him the presidency, and he signed a bill a year ago giving us that holiday. Well, we were celebrating that holiday before you signed it. Doesn't matter whether you signed it or not, could care less. We celebrated that day regardless. And as I said, that is a day to celebrate brotherhood, sisterhood, but especially manhood, which we don't celebrate. We've been trained not to celebrate manhood and for brother not to hug the other brother and say, brother, you strong. Stay strong for me. Stay strong for me. Well, them brothers back then stood strong for us. And that's what that day is, a celebration of Black manhood, to be the best that you could possibly be. And for the sisters to pick up that man and make him what he should be. If he's not what he should be, make him what he should be. And you in turn, you move up right to your side, not behind you, right to your side. So we're talking about a situation where so many others will distort the real history of that day. But that day is mighty. You know, the same way Native Americans can look at a chief crazy horse and see the difference in a chief crazy horse and a red cloud, you know, the sellout. So you have to celebrate your own. The same way Chinese will celebrate the contributions of a Mao Zedong. So we need to celebrate our own, and in our own way. We don't need permission from others. So it's a federal holiday. So whether you have the day off or not, whatever circles you're in, celebrate it your way, not the way white people want you to celebrate it. And if you cohabitate with a white person, you work it out how you're going to celebrate it. Be dignified and free enough to celebrate it in an African way. You know, First World said, free your African mind, and we need to free our African minds. Consequently, in doing that, we can better understand and reflect what our responsibilities are. I'll just call that the true meaning of Juneteenth, and we'll move on. Idaho cops recently, they're getting death threats for arresting white supremacist group called Patriotic Front. They've been in the news before, but these Patriotic Front members were spotted packing themselves in a U-Haul truck with tactical gear, and they are accused and was giving misdemeanors because they were going to ill effect a gay pride parade in Kula Aline, Idaho. Well, a little law enforcement tip: if they caught them entering a U-Haul truck, they had advanced intel and stopped them before. Now, they don't stop white folks before they do something to Black folks, but whatever they were going to do with their tactical gear and weapons, whatever they were going to do, they got locked up before it even went down. That should tell you something. So in any event, there are intelligence agencies all over the countries, and they have infiltrated these white supremacist groups because they realized the FBI made it clear, at least well over a dozen years ago, that they are a threat to American stability. You saw that at the Capitol building. You see that constantly. Years ago in Houston, several white supremacist groups that they called White Lives Matter. They just called the collective White Lives Matter. They were various race soldiers from various organizations at that event, and they surrounded the NAACP in Houston, surrounded them and would not let them leave the building, and demanded that they denounce other Blacks. Well, they couldn't leave the building. It took the Houston Police Department to talk with them and actually beg them to allow Black people to leave the building. It was the headquarters of the NAACP in Houston, because they don't move on, with SWAT teams on these militias, these white supremacist militias. They don't move on them. They talk to them. Some of them, I'm pretty sure they know them and familiar with them and buddies with them, might even be members. Consequently, they talk to them and allowed the NAACP members to leave several years ago in Houston. That should have been a wake-up call for the NAACP. That's always double dealing and selling out to the highest bidder. Maybe that should open up their eyes a little bit as to where they really should be standing. But in any event, that happened in Idaho, and which shows you they have a regard for white gay pride. Now, yes, there are some white people that detest white gay pride parades and what have you. And Idaho is one of the whitest states you can imagine. So they were protecting white people primarily from other white people. That was the whole thing. And that's how it went down. But just as importantly, I know time is getting tight. There in Tempe, Arizona, there were police officers who refused to save a Black man, Sean Rickings, a 34-year-old Black man who was drowning in a pond. They refused to and stood by. 3 police officers, Tempe, Arizona police officers, stood by and watched him drown. And his wife was irate. She's screaming for them to do something. They threatened to arrest her, but would not go into the water and save this man. Now, this same police department 3 weeks earlier saved the dog. Now, imagine that. You saved the dog 3 weeks earlier who was in a body of water. And yet, a 34-year-old Black man is struggling and you don't help him at all. You just stand there and watch. A spokesperson for their police union said that they are not trained to save people that are drowning. Well, you saved the dog 3 weeks before. So a dog somehow is more important to them. They can get wet to save a dog, but a Black man, no chance. Now that happened in Tempe, Arizona, and as I said, it was justified. And then you have the temerity after all that to threaten his wife that she better shut up or else. I mean, how sick are you? You're trained to protect and serve, yet you don't even try to save his life. Now, as you well know, we did it years ago. We showed you a case in St. Petersburg, Florida. What county was it's Pinellas County? How police officers, it was actually deputy sheriffs. They was chasing down 3 teenagers. 2 of them were 15 years old and 1 was 16-year-old girl. They were in a car. They borrowed a person's car and they were driving. And when the police gave chase, they became erratic and went into a pond, a lake. And the police officers stood there and watched them drown. And as the police officers walked toward the lake where they were screaming, and they walked down there, when they got close, they didn't hear anything anymore. And they kind of joked saying, well, I guess they're done now. They kept their jobs after that. So it is not uncommon for police officers to watch a grown black man die or watch two 15-year-olds and one 16-year-old girls drown in a car. They drowned in the car. And they didn't even attempt to save their lives. Had it been three little white girls, they would have tried to save them. I know they would. But these are all reminders that we have to cling to each other. Black man and black woman, we got to cling to each other. We all we have, but we all we need. We don't have to get into, oh, we're going to unite with other people of color. Let's unite among ourselves first and foremost. We need to put people in office that say black first, or really black only. There's time if you want to unite and have some alliances with some other people, but first cling to yourself. So I end by saying, black man, black woman, protect the black child, accept your own, and be yourself. So on this Juneteenth, celebrate black manhood, celebrate black womanhood. We can be better. And on this day, let's all make an agreement. We're not gonna lie to each other. We're gonna slow down on all this stuff. Let's stop lying, shucking and jiving. Let's not lie to each other on that day. Let's be honest on that day. Let's be true, cling to each other on that day, and be one people. Understand we have a common history, a common goal to free ourselves and to better ourselves together. We can build another Black Wall Street. We can do that tomorrow if we just shop among ourselves and organized and pooled our resources. We can make things better overnight. We can stop calling each other the N-word and stop calling women the B-word. We can do that. We have that capacity to do that. So I end the way I always do. Black man, black woman, protect the black child, accept your own, and be yourself. Peace. Peace and power.